I'd like to thank Michael for the opportunity to talk to you today. What I'm going to try to do is cover basically three things. I'm going to talk a little bit about buying versus selling heifers, but I'm not going to talk very long on it because it all comes down to how much cost you got in that calf, and you sell it and you buy another one, really. And there's some other issues that Sarah kind of alluded to a little bit. But I want to go over there's a beef cow, it's a spreadsheet. It's on the Coastal Inn website that you can go in. There's several little spreadsheets that you can use to evaluate, what you might be able to pay for a cow or a heifer or whatever, and they're pretty handy. Then I want to talk to you a little bit about the restocking strategies. It's a little project that Joe Pascal and I worked on, and we looked at 5 different scenarios for rebuilding the herd. As you know, a lot of cattlemen, you either cut back totally or you cut back. Most I heard have cut back down to 25% of what they had 3 or 4 years ago. But if you're in a position where you got the grass and you want to start adding to the herd, we thought we'd look at these different scenarios and see kind of what impact it may have. Then I'm a salesman, Thomas. I want to talk to you briefly about the Farm Assistance Program. And I guess I used, what? Okay, that's fine. When you're looking at buying versus raising replacement heifers, as I said, Sarah talked a little bit on this. The decision to retain heifers is normally based on 3 primary factors, and that's the known price and availability of the quality of what you're replacing with for the females, because you ought to know your heifers pretty well at that time, right? Another is the perceived or real advantages in genetic reproduction potential. For example, what if I want to improve the genetics in my herd? Now, you can do it through changing bulls or AI or whatever, but you can also do it through going out and buying different stock to bring into your herd if you're trying to improve or change the genetics a little bit. Then, really what it gets down to, which one of these is this green button the light?
Yeah, the middle button.
Right here. Basically, when I say total cost of doing it yourself or purchasing, really all that really means is what do I have in that calf versus what it's going to cost me? What can I sell my calf for versus what I'm going to go out and buy one for? If any of these criteria here are lacking, that means you might be better off going out and purchasing outside heifers, okay? Now, so you must consider when you're looking at heifers, whether you're buying or whether you're trying to use replacement heifers, one of the things you always have to look at is what, I'll go give her this pointer here, Michael. See, I got it. What is the development cost of what you're raising versus what you're purchasing? For example, on either case, if you got a chance to buy some heifers from someone and you look at them and you go, man, I'm going to have to feed these. I'm going to have to feed them more. I'm going to have to give them more hay and stuff versus what you already have. But in reality, the development cost of heifers is a factor that you have to take into consideration when you decide how you're going to expand your herd. Or rebuild, maybe not expand, but rebuild your herd, if you really destock because of drought. And I don't need to tell you guys this, but when you look at cost, you got to consider everything. You got to look at your travel, commission, trucking, inspection fees, processing fees, permits, health certificates, as well as the purchasing price. Because that's going to really be the total cost of going out and buying a heifer, buying one, or a group of heifers. You got to look at all the costs. How much vaccinations am I going to have to do? Have they already been vaccinated? More than likely, you're probably going to have to do the vaccinations yourself. Now, if you do it yourself, that's one cost. If you have Sarah come out and do it, that's a different cost you're looking at. And what is the rebreeding potential? Now that's kind of hard to determine. But if you have a pretty good track record for rebreeding, and your heifers rebreeding, you may be better off. You may need to think about keeping your own versus, because when you go out and buy somebody else's, you don't know what you're getting, really. A lot of times you're getting what they don't want, right? So you've got to be really careful. But really it all comes down to dollars versus dollars. What can I sell my heifer for? And what can I acquire a heifer for? If you're going to go the heifer route. Now in this little project that Joe and I did, I'm going to tell you right now, what we found out that heifers may or may not be the best way to go, unless that's all you have available. The availability, particularly in the market we have now, where so many cattle have been sent to the sale barn, a lot of them have been slaughtered, our choice on availability of what kind of cattle, whether it's cows or whether it's heifers or whatever, may be limited, particularly in certain areas. A lot of cows, like in this county, that may have been called out and reduced, they're gone where they're at. Some of them went to slaughter, and some of them went somewhere else. So they're not, the availability is going to be a big, big factor. Now, Michael, can I get you to come in? I want to play around with a model. I want to, and I'm going to do this, but to be honest with you, remember I just got this saying, what is the cost that you have versus what you can pay for, or you're going to have to pay for a heifer. And a lot of times that's what it comes down to. And I'm not smart enough to know how much your cost is in a cow, or much a calf, a heifer, or how much your cost of Bob's or who else. But you have a pretty good idea of what your costs are. Now Larry Falconer, who is Levi's predecessor, and what I want to do is go over this model. And then, now back on my handout, the web address of it on coastalbend.edu website at the center. It's down on the bottom of the page. I'll get back to that in just a second. But what I want to point out, this is what he called a cow bid price estimator. Now he also has a spreadsheet or two in there looking at replacement methods and stuff. Now, I didn't choose to look at that one because I'm more familiar with this, okay? I'm an old guy and it's kind of hard for me to learn new tricks, okay? So anyway, I want to point out that this is a pretty good spreadsheet. Now is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. It may be a little hard to see, but okay, I want to point out kind of how to use it. Now this is your normal steer weight, your heifer weight. Now I've just got a number plugged in there, okay? Now cow price, now that could be your heifer price. Let's say you buy a heifer for $900. Let's just assume some things here, okay? Now what you have over here, cow cell weight. Now that is a cow cell weight. Okay, let's say you get to a point where you're going to get rid of that heifer down the road, okay? And you say that heifer is going to weigh 1,200 pounds. Now what number of calving opportunities, how many years, now this is an 8-year model here. How many years can you get a calf out of that? We're going to play with that number here in a minute. Okay, and this is a discount rate. Now what a discount rate is kind of like a rate of return that you would expect off your investment. And based off of 3% rate of return, and the prices that I have put in here, which we can argue prices. That's one of the reasons I didn't really want to get into the dollar cents, okay? The net present value is $767 as we have the numbers right now. Now what that means is if that net present value is positive, it means you have a positive cash flow. How many of y'all are finance guys other than Levi? Levi, you keep me in there. Okay. So you understand what net present value is. It's kind of discounting the flows over this 8-year period to right now, okay? So, we're going to change the number here in a minute. Now here's the start year, Now, cow-calf weaning percent. So we're saying that 9 out of 10 years, we're gonna get calf out of this heifer, okay? And here's the prices, and I'm not gonna mess with those. Now, the cow cull price is out here, I'll just put $65 in there. Now, right now, the market shows probably something a little different. Now, if you look at the gross receipts from the sales, you can see here, and here's the calf operating cost. And that's a key. How much money do you have in that calf when it gets to the age for replacement? Or, another way of looking at it, how much money does it take me to maintain that cow every year? Now, out of Spa, Stan Beavers, up at Vernon, who's kind of the big daddy of that right now, he says it's about $600 and something, which I think maybe is high myself. But he includes every cost he can think of in there, okay? But you do have to consider, when you come up with this cost figure, how much is my land rent? And how many acres? If it's, say, $15 an acre and I'm running on 5 acres, well, you got $75 worth of land cost in there, right? So you do have to consider things, how much feed, your vaccinations, whatever you have in that cow, cubes, hay, whatever, for that year. So I just put 500, okay? Because I don't know anything, okay? Now here, let's say if you're going to buy that heifer, I don't know where Larry, I didn't change this number. This is the number Larry had in there. He said it's 47.5%. You're going to have to go out and borrow. Now, capital farm credit, I just don't argue with you on that, okay? You lending types back there, okay? Length of term, now he's got 5 years and it's 6% interest rate. But if you look at the debt service requirement, this is what you have. And down here, cash flow available, really to service your debt or whatever. That's what you have available here. Net cash flow after you service your debt. That's an estimate. Cow salvage value. Over here, this is what you're going to sell that cow for. Let's go back up a little bit, knock it to the top. Okay, I want to change one number. If you go out and buy a heifer or you keep heifers, what's going to happen that first year that you have that animal? What's going to happen the first year? If it's an unbred heifer, you're not going to have a calf, right? It's all cost, right? So let's go in here, right here in that first deal, put a 0. Okay, now just stop right there and see what happened right here. One of the big things about heifers is all you've got is cost that first year. Now, you've got some development costs in there too that Joe and I tried to point out in our little paper, okay? But I want y'all to keep that in mind. If you're trying to evaluate whether you ought to keep heifers, buy heifers, or by open cows or pairs or whatever, this model can help you go in and do a quick analysis, okay? You can sit there and play with it and say, hey, well maybe, the sell barn, this is what cattle are selling for, this is what I hear that pairs are selling for, or whatever. And you can kind of do some quick analysis before you go out there, okay? And that's what the beauty of this and those other models that Larry has worked on, in conjunction with guys at Oklahoma State, and they put all these little models together. They're good, quick decision tools, okay? But again, as you can see, once you just change this number right here to $600 for that first year, okay? And I just pulled it. See what happened? So, the present value of all your cash flows, because of that first year of development, I call it a development year. I'm not an expert like Joe. It's going to dramatically impact what you can expect. Now, the other thing is, what if right here, what if right here, let's say, why don't you change that number to 0? What if you lost the calf that year? If you like that heifer, okay, and that heifer is really a good heifer and you like the quality of it or whatever, see what happens is it dramatically impacts what you're going to be able to make out of that heifer. And it's the same way with the cow, because you could lose a calf on a cow. So then you have to make a decision, am I going to hold on to that cow or do I go ahead and move her out? A lot of it's going to depend on how much grass you got out there, right? And if you're going to have to be buying a bunch of hay or whatever. So my point is this, when we're trying to replace, and I hope to show you some numbers in a minute to kind of back this up. That first year, if you don't have a calf that first year, all you got is investment out there, right? And expenses. That's all you got out there. Okay, let's go back to mine. Is there any questions there before I move on? Okay. Okay. Let me go back. Yeah, let me go back. But here's that website, the address on the website. If you go to Coastal Bend and you look under program areas, ag economics, and there's some decision tools and stuff, and the cow bid one is the one we just got to looking at. But there's several others on there that could be used by y'all to help make some quick decisions, okay? Okay, let's move forward. Back 4 or 5 months ago, I said, Joe, what are some issues that you think we ought to be addressing? And Joe said, hey, our guys out there, they've got to start restocking. Why don't we look at some of the scenarios? Now, there's like 14 or 15 different possible ways of expanding the herd, okay? A study that was done by Ron Gill, is that right, Joe? Ron Gill and Stan Beavers. They looked at 14 different ways. Well, Joe and I said, well, we don't want to do 14, let's just look at 4 or 5. So that's what we tried to do here. And here they are. We looked at open heifers, bred heifers, young pairs, older pairs, and open cows. So these are the 5 scenarios that we looked at. Okay? Now within these scenarios, you can argue the numbers that we put in there, okay? But if you do, I'll refer you to Joe, let Joe defend them, okay? Now, if you've got my handout or if you've got the publication, you can probably see these numbers easier. Now we had to make, in the farm assist model, in fact, that's what we used, the same model that I use in the farm assist program, where I analyze farm or ranch operations or a combination thereof. It's the same model. We use that to do the analysis. Well, I had to come up with some assumptions. And we assumed that there was going to be some off-farm income here. We just assumed they lived on the ranch and their living expense was $30,000 a year, which may be on the low side. Now, we assumed that there's $95,000 left over from when the cattle was sold. One of the assumptions we made here was somebody totally sold their cattle. So you probably have heard Joe or I, either one in the past, say you can't keep yourself out of the drought. That's one of the biggest problems we have sometimes, okay? And it all depends on how long the drought is and what the price of hay and cubes are. But it's hard to keep yourself out of the drought. So, but we said we had $95,000 of capital left. Had to use some of it to pay bills, okay, when it sold out. 2,000 acre operation, a little bit of it's in coastal and so forth. 100% ownership. We wanted to try to keep it kind of simple. There's a little bit of hunting income, no royalty income. We had a little bit of herbicide and so forth, fertilizer and so forth expense. We also, well, we had 200 cows and 8 bulls, vet expenses, weaning weights. We assumed 550 on the steers and 500 on the heifers, okay? These are the prices back in June when we ran this analysis. That's what the prices were for those weight cattle. Okay, I think that's an error right there. Anyway, cull cow prices, we had at 90 cents, cull bull at $1. I know those prices are different. Replacement bulls at $3,000 an acre. I can remember when Mr. Pascal back there, or Doc, was teaching a class down at Kingsville, and he asked me to come in and kind of stand in for him because he was up at Fort Worth or somewhere. So I was talking about replacement, and I was going through stuff, and I was talking about replacement bulls, how much it would cost. And then that day I used $2,500. And this young lady from New Jersey, is that what she was? Delaware. And I'm not picking on her because she's a lady, okay? But she said, well, why do we want to spend $2,500 on one bull when you can get 4 or 5 bulls for the same amount? And there was a young guy that was a rancher. And the ranch, he leaned over, and he said, here's what kind of calves you want, you know? So you want good quality calves or you want soft, okay? But anyway, that's the bottom line, Joe. Not to pick on you ladies, okay? Yeah, okay. That's because of the gray hair, okay? I'm sorry. We had hay at 120 a ton, cubes at 20 cents a pound. And then we did do pregnancy and bull testing, okay? So this may or may not actually fit your operation, how you do things. Now, assumptions, other assumptions. On open heifers, we assumed we had no calf that first year. 90%, then we dropped down to basically an 80 or 85% range. Culling rate 15%, replacement price per head at $900, which may or may not be the case today, okay? As you can see on bred heifers, we put it in at 90% because we could lose the calf, okay? But the second year we said 80, then we went into 85%. 15% cull rate and $1,000 replacement. Young pairs, at the time we did this, was about $1,400 for a good young pair. And that's pretty high. But I think all cattle prices for replacement right now are pretty high. That may be actually on the low side for good quality stuff.
Where you gonna find bred heifers for $1,000?
Yeah, you may not. Yeah. Okay, old pairs we put in and so forth. Now, the results, if you look at that publication, the key numbers I want you to look at. If you look at here's the total receipts. Now this is over a 10-year period. This is a 10-year average. So what we did, we tried to take into account the fluctuations in the cattle market. We used the FAPRI, the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute projections out of the University of Missouri. The national projections, okay? And we put in, and we kind of changed our prices each year according to what those projections are, okay? And you say, why use those? Well, John Deere, Monsanto, USDA, a lot of companies use those projections because they're about as good as you can find, okay? For long term. Oh, I just messed up. Okay, hit the wrong button. Total cost, cash receipt, or net cash farm income. Net cash farm income per cow. Now we can sit here and argue cost and all that. Because some of those prices and stuff may be on the low side right now. But this was the highest net cash farm income per cow, the bred heifers. Now why would that be higher than that open heifer? We already talked about it. I'm putting you on the spot. Why would the projected net cash farm income be more for bred heifers. And on an open heifer, you do not have a calf that first year. Okay? And that is probably the key to these results here, okay? In the same way with open cows. You don't have a calf that first year. And actually, the two best scenarios was the bred heifers or the older pairs compared to open cows or open heifers. It's because you have a calf to help in that cash flow. Now, if you got these pockets and you're trying to improve your herd and you know you can go out and buy heifers, it may not be important to you having a calf that first year. Okay? Now the other key is you can look at what this number here, I almost messed up, cumulative 10-year cash flow. That is pre-tax. And what that is over a 10-year period, what is the combined cash flows that you would expect out of that, out of the operation, okay? And you can still see that the two best, again, are your pairs and your bred heifers. Now, maybe easier to see this graph inside your book. Now, if you look here, open heifers is basically that line. Bred heifers is there. Young pairs is basically here. Older pairs is up here. And older open is up here. Now, if you just look at this part of the graph, which is from here to here, okay? I wanted to be able to show the distinction between these lines. If you just look at that, you would say, well, older open is the best option. But it all gets down into right here. How much was your initial cost for that animal that you put out there? Okay? Whether you pay $1,200 for it, $1,000 or $1,500. That first year affects the cash flow for the next 10 years, or 8 years or whatever. Now, restocking after a drought can have an insignificant impact on your long-term profitability of your operation. And basically getting back to what do you make that first year? How much it costing you, whether or not you have a calf. Okay? Restocking with bred heifers, older pairs may be the most effective way, and a lot of it has to do with this, having a calf that first year. And open heifers may be the least profitable because of no calf plus development costs. And we did put development costs in the two heifer scenarios. Okay? Extra fees, huge and hay and stuff. But it depends on, a lot of that depends on how much you have to condition, okay? Because if you get a chance, a real good deal on these cows over here and they don't look too good, you're going to have to condition them, particularly if you're going to get them to breed, right? So. Now, is there any questions so far? Because I want to switch gears and do my sales job, okay? Yeah.
Our scenario with buying bred heifer, I guess, is how far away they are from travel time and the loss.
Yeah.
Because you have, most of the time, you've got a 10%
Yeah.
bringing in bred heifer. And I don't know if y'all threw that in there.
Well, we kind of did, but maybe not to the detail that you may have a bigger problem because like you said, we probably should have. And if that's the case, then bred heifers, the older cow maybe would get that really good. If your experience with bred heifers has been not too good, then you may want to move away from that.
You just about every time.
Yeah, just about every time, yeah. Because again, with bred heifers, you don't know what you buy.
Right.
You don't know whose problem you buy.
You don't know what's in it.
Yeah, you don't know what bull this is unless you know the guy. and you know his genetics in his herd, right?
And if you got first time up with red heifer, you still got a lot of production costs before you get that stuff in the ground. So early red heifer tend to be more expensive.
And that's why we tried to put a little bit of development costs in there, but like you said, if there's early bred and you're still trying to develop a condition that heifer, and your cost is going to go up. So you need to consider that when you're saying, okay, do I go out and get bred heifers or do I go get pairs? Well, I kind of already know what I got. You really don't 100% know, it's a lot closer than that, right? Okay. Now, farm assistance, that's a program that I manage. And what it is basically an analytical tool or a planning tool, okay? And what I basically do is I work with individual producers one-on-one. We put your information into the model, okay? And we can do whatever analysis. And what I mean by this, let's say you have a chance, maybe you want to change your mix of animals, your quality. You're going to have to go out and buy a totally new breeding stock or whatever. We can analyze that before you put money into it. Now, the money's coming up with some good money. Because just like any model, like what Larry's little model was, or this farm assist model, if you put, excuse my language, ladies, but if you put crap in, you're going to get crap out on the other end, okay? So you want to have good numbers that you put into it, okay? So when I sit down with a producer, whether it's a farmer, rancher, whatever, or mix, I say, well, let's get this as close as possible. And if we don't, in fact, I had one farmer in the valley that the first couple of years he was involved in a project. I was working in a big project, and he admitted that he just kind of threw out numbers. Well, after he got to looking at stuff, and each year he decided, hey, about time I put big numbers in there. And after starting about the third year, he really concentrated on what his costs were. And I think we had some pretty good numbers after that. The first year or two, wasn't bad, but it was estimates, I'm not saying you have to get it to the penny, like how much herbicide you put per acre or whatever, but it needs to be fairly close. Okay? Basically, it's a long-term analytical planning tool. We project out over 10 years. Now, I know it's going to say, well, things happen. Well, it's just like anything. What you do is analyze on what is the best situation right now, because 6 months, a year from now, something may happen that's going to totally change the market. Like what if we start another drought? I won't say that. I might be mad at me and shoot me next time you see me. But what if another drought happens? Or what if the cattle market crashes or whatever? That something happened. Maybe there was a big brucellosis scare all over in 5 or 6 states. Well, that's going to affect the market. But there's a lot of things that can happen, but it doesn't mean that the analysis is done right now. It's not a good analysis. Because we look at your base operation versus any options that you want to do, okay? I'll call them alternatives, alternative scenarios. Now, I've got farmers in Oasis County and Santa Pat County, Bobs County, but I've been in Refugio County. I've got one or two here that I've worked with for like 8 years in the lab. So, and every year we analyze where they're at, okay, and where they want to be going. It can be used as a planning tool, a strategic analysis tool, and as I just said, to me the key is right here. You can actually evaluate what might be happening before you put any money into it. And you can use it as a communication tool with your banker or your lender. In actuality, if you do that, that's your choice, okay? Now, the program does qualify for the FSA education requirements. The young lady, I remember when we were talking about that, she used to work for FSA. And Alex, And so you have a 2-year period to get education requirements. I don't care if you're just a John Doe operator or you got a PhD like Joe. They still expect you to go through training, okay? But our program qualifies for that training, okay? Now, if you want to know where you are today or where you might be headed, maybe there's something I can help you with. Now, there's different issues. You know, we've kind of hinted on a couple. What if you want to expand your operation? Maybe you want to maybe buy some more land or whatever. Changes in herd practices or size. Maybe you want to go from a cow-calf operation to a stocker operation. You can analyze that. What if you've got a child you want to bring into the operation? Changes in the mix. Maybe you want to change what you have there. Custom versus ownership or lease versus ownership is different. All kinds of scenarios we can do. All kinds of enterprises, crops, and livestock, okay? Now, don't laugh about this over here. I could not find a good vegetable because I don't think you consider watermelon a vegetable. So I did have pointed out to me more than one vegetable. We actually have done alpacas. I haven't had to do that, okay? But I have done grower operations, okay? But anyway, we can do basically any kind of livestock operation we can analyze, okay? Now, data requirements. I need current financial information, 10 years of production history, particularly if it's on your row crops, or on livestock, if you've got a history of what your yield or calf weaning weights up in, that would be good. If not, we can estimate it. I'll take an average. Y'all know what a bell curve, how many have had statistics? You know what a bell curve is? And that high point is your median, your average. That's the 550 or 500. Well, what if some years you may not get there because of drought. Some years with fresh grass, you may get a higher weaning rate. So we sometimes have to come up with that. But I get the farm or the rancher to help me do that. It's not like I dreamed it up, okay? List of land and equipment resources, like what units you have. I call it units. You got 500 acres over here, 1,000 over here, or whatever. I call those units, 2 units. Land tenure arrangements, do you own or cash lease or crop share? This is not as important in the future. That's your government program, your yields, your APH yields and all that on the row crops and stuff. And since I'm not going to say it's going to be needed in the future, but because we still don't know what the farm program is going to do. But more than likely, your direct payments are gone. Okay? Because that's that 509B report that shows you the base yields, your CC yields, and your direct yields, etc. Then I would want overhead expenses and production costs. That would be your fuel, your labor, your insurance, all those repairs and maintenance, your cost per acre, what herbicides and insecticides you might use, and hay baling, how much is it costing you to bale that hay, whatever per bale, or per acre. I put it in per acre. Okay, what comes out is a 10-year projection. And then I'll be the first to tell you, after 2 or 3 years, you're really sticking your mouth out. And that's why trends are important. I like to look at graphs. I call them pictures, okay? Just like the one I had, the graph, there's 5 different cattle scenarios, because I like to look at trends. Now, if you're right here, and your trend is either way, that's pretty good, right? Now, if you're 75 years old, kind of like Roy Parker, oh, I'm sorry, Roy, you're not quite there, and it's flat, it may not be a bad deal, right? Because you may only be operating a couple more years. But what if you're a young whippersnapper, like a group of these people are, and you're 30 years old, 25, 35, and the trend is like that? And doesn't that sort of thing? So, That's why I like to look at grass. Now, and we do a comparison of the base, what I call the base, to proposed alternatives. Now, is it perfect? No. That's why I say that if you're serious about looking and analyzing, we need to do it every year or at least every 2 years. Okay? I'm trying to drum up this, okay? Now, information, everything I need you probably have in your office at home. I come to your house basically, okay? We sit down. If you call me and say, I want to do this, I'll say, okay, this is what I want you to put together. Okay, give me hard copies. And what I do, and we'll probably talk about alternatives here too. I'll go back and we'll sign an agreement, and basically that agreement says that I'll treat your information confidential. You have to look at me like you do your banker or your tax person. But I guarantee you share some pretty confidential stuff with them, right? So, I gather the information. There is a fee involved. It's $400 the first year. It's $200 thereafter. We raised the fees 2 years ago from $250 to $400, but it had not been changed in over 10 years. So I had one old guy says, okay, Matt, you said it takes about 40 hours of your time to do this, and it's $250, so you're worth $6 and something cents an hour. I told him not to be on the high side. It doesn't cover all our costs, by any means, but it's kind of like a commitment. Okay? I'll put it together. I'll kind of in the computer. Then I'll come back out, or most of the time I do come out and sit down with you and show you the preliminary result to make sure you're happy with the numbers you gave me and make sure I don't make a mistake. And I think I'm perfect, but every once in a while I'm less than perfect. Okay? I go back and I finalize the alternatives, and I come back and deliver the report. So usually it's a 3-stage process. That first meeting may take 2.5 hours. My record in the house is 5 hours and a half, or 5 hours and a quarter. That was a 2-cow, 2-bull operation. The shortest time I've been in the house was the second time I did this farmer in Oasis County. The farm about 5,600 acres. The first 30 minutes we talked about his kids, and I was out of there 1 hour later. So an hour and a half in the house after 30 minutes talking about kids. Okay? But he knew what I needed the second time. Okay? Usually the second meeting may take an hour and a half to an hour. And the third meeting, depending on how much we talk, it's usually about an hour. So it's a little bit of time commitment. Okay? Now, that's basically it. The reason I use that picture reminds me of my grandpa Dallas. She looked a whole lot like that. And we talked. So, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.